Welcome to another DK Custom Products video. I'm Dwayne and this is Kevin. And a few weeks ago, we released a video showing a trike accident. But this video, we're gonna go frame by frame and try to figure out what happened.
Yeah, so like Dwayne said, we're going to go frame by frame and see what we think happened. It's impossible to know for sure,
Yeah.
but there's definitely things that can be learned in looking at this video and what could have been done differently.
Yeah.
Why did it happen? And how can we all ride better to avoid any situations
That's right.
like this?
And in that last video, we welcomed comments. Asked, what do you guys think happened? And we got some comments, and they were very polarizing. All the way from they should have banned these with big red three-wheelers, all the way up to just user error.
What I mentioned in the first video is that it was just a confluence of a lot of different things. We're going to address a lot of the comments that were made on the first video and talk about those some. And we're also going to go through frame by frame on what happened. And I'm going to share how I approach corners and curves and why I approach different curves different ways. One of the things that we did mention in the comments in the last video was that trikes are capable of going through curves very quickly and safely. And we'll put a video up in the corner here of Mary and I riding our tri-glide through the Dragon at a very good clip. And we never came close to reaching the limits of the tri-glide. So for those of you who want to see what a tri-glide can do in the curves, go ahead and look at that video that we put up in the corner.
Talking about the comments, I think one of the biggest themes where people were trying to conclude what happened was speed. They were thinking he's just going too fast. And, there's trikes behind him, there's trikes in front of him, and they're all virtually going the same speed. No one else had an accident. So I don't think, excessive speed was a factor by any means.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. And it was more how the corner was approached.
Right. So there's a right way to navigate a curve and there's a less than right way.
The most popular and holds true for trikes and for two-wheel bikes is to do an apex like we see right here. And that's where you take the sharpness out of the curve.
Right.
Now, the other thing that you can do on a trike, because you want to keep that inside tire on the ground, is when you're going through a curve, you take the inside of the curve all the way through the curve, because usually the inside of the curve, the tire is lower. And you can see that that is what he did right here. He started out at the inside, but then he went to the outside. He didn't stay on the inside. And so by staying on the inside, you are keeping that inside tire down low, much less likely for it to lift up off the ground. So what was another common thing that was brought up?
And it's understandable. A lot of people thought he grabbed a handful of front brakes because right before the accident, a split second before the tire lifts, you see the brake lights come on. But it wasn't a handful of brakes.
It was a foot brake. I talked to him. He did not use his handbrake. And while we're at it, people missed it in the first video. This is a 2015 Tri-Glide. It has no nanny controls, no RDRS, no traction control. There's nothing that the trike did that surprised him because of some sort of nanny controls.
Right. And if you're not familiar with the detriments to the newer models with their RDRS and all those nanny controls, we did a video on that and we'll put it up in the corner. But dissecting that problem, that's a whole other video, a whole other can of worms we're not going to get into today.
That is not what happened here.
And I think as a lot of people pointed out, this curve was off camber. So, that the geometries of the road really didn't help things. If it was a high embanking curve, he would have been a lot less likely to lift that tire, but it wasn't. And it was sort of downhill and just a perfect storm.
And a lot of people commented that it wasn't off camber. You had to be there to see it was off camber. It was definitely off camber. And when he crossed the line into the left lane, it was even more off camber.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through it frame by frame. So you can see the brake lights just came on as he's approaching the curve. He's still going straight. He's not. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Putting the brakes on as you approach the curve to scrub off your speed, to be at a speed that you want to go through the curve at. And here's the key. Trail braking is very, very valuable on a trike, because when you put on your rear brakes, not your front brakes, there's not a two-wheeler, it's a trike. When you put on your rear brakes, it squats that rear end down a little bit. And so it helps plant those tires. And then you control the speed through the curve, not by changing the throttle. You control the speed through the curve by going a little more brake or a little bit less brake.
Yeah.
That way it keeps the trike very stable, and it keeps downward force on those rear tires. So you see he started out perfectly. Rear brakes are on. Rear brakes are on. He's in the curve. Rear brakes are on. Rear brakes are on. Rear brakes are still on. And we're going to come back to this little section right here in a minute. But let's just look at when the rear brakes come off. Rear brakes are still on. Rear brakes are still, rear brakes are off. You saw the rear brakes go off? Now look what happens.
The tire begins to lift.
Tires lifting. And see, we're going frame by frame, but this is 30 frames per second. So we're at like 1/5 of a second. So about 1/5 of a second after he lets up on his rear brakes, the rear right tire lifts off the ground in less than 1/2 of a second. So this is something that I absolutely would never do. And that is let up on the rear brakes when I'm in a curve. To me, that's the #1 cause of what happened, is letting up on the rear brakes. Now, if he would have kept the rear brakes on but given it more throttle or chopped the throttle, it might have done the same thing. What you want is you want to keep that rear end planted down solid by having power going to the rear wheels through your throttle and having braking of your rear wheels through your rear brakes. That keeps it stable and planted. And 1/2 a second after he left up on the brakes,
you see what happened. And another comment we got a lot was a lot of people were pointing out how he was erratic in his steering. So when the tire lifted, he turned left immediately. And that's what sent him off the road. And that's correct.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
what else was he going to do?
Well, the thing about it is when you get in this situation, there are 2 things that you can do to get that rear tire back on the ground. Putting the brakes on is not going to do you any benefit now. Okay?
Yeah, the damage is done.
So one thing is you can lean way to the right. You can put a lot of your body weight over to the right and get that rear tire down. The other thing you can do is you can steer to the left, and that will bring the rear tire down, which is what he did. And he steered to the left, and it brought the rear tire down. And we can see that right here. There, you can see that turning to the left. You can see his front tire is turned to the left, and the rear tire is coming down. But now he's headed toward the edge of the road.
Right.
Okay. And now all of this is happening in milliseconds.
Yeah.
Okay. And let me tell you, those of you who have not been in an accident, it's so easy to go, well, if he would have done this or would have done that. When you are in a situation like this, there's no thinking going on. It's all pure reaction.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to practice in an empty parking lot so that you build muscle memory, because you're not going to have time in a 1/4 of a second or a 1/10 of a second to think through what you should be doing and then to execute that. By the time you think it through and go to execute it, everything's over.
Right.
It's all done. Whatever is going to happen has happened. So he instinctively, because he is an experienced rider, instinctively knew to turn left.
Yeah.
He didn't instinctively shift his weight to the right. He may not have ever practiced that, or again, in a situation like this, things are happening so quick.
Yeah.
You know, it's so hard to
Right. So
do what
yeah.
you think you should have
Right,
done
right.
after the
Yeah, so
fact.
while we agree with most of you guys that it was user error, it's not that black and white because it can literally happen to anybody. Like
Yeah.
this guy's mistake happened well before the actual damage was done. That how he navigated that curve.
Right.
So, he best case scenario is try to reduce or minimize the damage, and that's sort of what he did. Now, yeah, his trike is pretty much total.
Yeah, and he turned to the left. That brought the rear wheel down. Now, the rear wheel didn't come off the ground. Nothing else happened until he got into the ditch.
Because I can tell you what would have been worse than turning left, bringing that wheel back down, is holding that curve and flipping that trike over on
the asphalt.
Yeah, that would have been worse. So
yes.
Yeah, he made the right decision at that point. He just made a poor decision leading up to that point.
To that point, right. So the only thing that I think that could have been done differently in the curve once the rear wheel was off the ground is lean a huge amount of body weight. I mean, really lean to the right and bring it back down. And then he might have been able to stay in his lane. Once he was in the other lane, the camber was way off camber and there was not much he could do other than go in the ditch. And then the contour of the ditch, as you can see, rear wheel's on the ground, everything's on the ground. And he's trying to steer and stay on the road, but it's so off camber. And of course, he just had the rear tire go off, so he's not wanting to oversteer and bring the rear tire off again.
Right.
But then when it goes into the ditch, then the left rear tire really drops out, and you can, and by default, that's putting the right tire up higher and making it light. And then you can see, we'll watch, the front tire digs into a groove that's in the ditch and really almost does an endo, right?
Yeah.
Because now both rear tires are coming off the ground because that front tire is digging in, and then the whole thing just catapults, and we can see what happens. Unfortunately, he was thrown clear of the trike and it didn't hit him. And off it goes.
Yeah. Now he was lucky, but I feel like he would have been more lucky if there was an open parking lot there instead of a ditch and an embankment for him to run into.
Oh yeah, because if it would have been open space, nothing would have happened.
Yeah.
It would have come off the ground. He would have turned to the left, and then he would have gone across the lane of traffic, which hopefully there was no traffic coming. And then if there was enough room there, then everything just would have settled down and that was a close one.
Yeah. So again, we urge you guys not to be too harsh on him, because I mean I've had a lot more close calls where I got luckier than this guy, and I feel like most of you watching, if you've ridden a motorcycle for any amount of time, you've had some close calls that could have went either way. So I try not to be so harsh on this guy because it literally could have happened to anybody, and this would have been worse if it happened to me. I'm very much a novice on trikes. I've ridden a handful of miles on your trike only, and it's a whole different beast.
And some people notice that his front handlebars jerked a little. Well, they didn't jerk because he jerked them. That right rear tire hit that irregularity in the road, and he was going slow enough that it shuddered the front handlebars a little bit.
If you've never ridden a trike, you're not going to be familiar with that, because if prior to my first time riding a trike, I never would have thought that happens. But I mean, the slightest bump, as soon as you hit it, you can feel that
when you're going slow. Not when you're going fast, when you're going slow. And so, but you can see he's on the inside of the curve. He's not apexing the curve. You can also see the inside of the curve right along this white line that he didn't take. It's all lower. So that is what I was saying earlier, is if you keep your right tire literally on that white line, right at the edge of the asphalt, you're going to keep that right tire down lower, and you're going to keep it planted much less likely to come off the ground. And that's the opposite of apexing, but sometimes that's the safest way to go. But he did not, that's something that someone had brought up, a few people brought up, jerking the handlebars. So to recap, number one, he wasn't going too fast 4 or 5 other trikes had gone through as faster than him. He'd gone through other corners as faster. I was behind him. Obviously, when this happened, I slowed down, but he was not going too fast. Okay, he put his brakes on, approaching the curve, perfect. He was halfway between apexing and taking, the inside of the curve. That was something that could have improved. The genesis of that rear wheel coming off the ground was the release of the brake right there. And then less than a half a second later, because of the release of the brake, the rear wheel came off the ground. Because, again, can't say it too many times, having throttle squats the rear end, having rear brake squats the rear end. The minute he let up on the rear brake, it's not like he gave it throttle, but the minute he let up on the rear brake, it took that downward force, it removed that downward force, and that rear tire lifted.
And you say the minute he left off, but really this is a game of milliseconds.
Oh yeah, less than a half a second.
If he would have just, and let this be a lesson, you guys, just a split second, if he would have helped trail brake just a little longer, this accident was avoidable. But it's hard to really put fault on somebody over a millisecond.
Oh yeah, and then only 2 things could have happened here in this situation that would have alleviated the problem of that rear tire coming off the ground. One is to steer left, puts it back on. The other is to lean way to the right. And he chose to steer left, and everything that happened after that, there was nothing that anybody could have done differently.
And again, if you guys missed the previous video, the guy came out of this relatively unharmed and rode the bike away from the accident. He had to knock the dent out of the fender that was pressing against the front tire. But other than that, it took a licking and kept on ticking. And I'll put some photos up showing the carnage, the damage, the result of this accident, in case you guys missed it in the first video. Just to wrap it up, if there's anything you guys feel that we did not cover in this video or did not see or overlooked, leave us a comment below. The last video, like I said, it got some pretty good comments. We love input here. We can only do so much in these videos. We like feedback so that we can follow up with that. But if you have any questions or any input or any concern, leave us a comment below or shoot me an email to support@dkcustomproducts.com.
Y'all ride safe out there.